We welcome you to the Jim Masters Show, live entertainment, lifestyle, variety, celebrity talk show series. And it's so great to have you with us. And thanks for joining us, gang, wherever you're watching all around the world. Our international audience of lovely viewers watching from the United States, Canada, Mexico, all throughout North America. We welcome everybody there. We also welcome everybody who's watching in South America. We've got a great contingent in Brazil and Argentina and throughout South America. Also, we welcome all of you who are watching right now from Europe. Yeah, we have a lot of European viewers, and we love having all of you here, as well as a big following in Asia and Africa, Australia, New Zealand, all points of the globe. Welcomed here at the Jim Masters Show Live Series. A pleasure to have you here. Hope you're having a good day. If you're not, stick with us. We've got an extraordinary guest, an extraordinary story. And I think it's going to move you and inspire you at levels maybe that you haven't experienced in a while. Good to have you with us. If you'd like to comment during the course of the show, we do have a way for you to do that, gang, and that is what we call the JMS Levity Hall chat room. You're saying, what the heck is that? Well, it's something quick and easy. It is our chat room that we have when the show is on. It's a chat room that is sort of live and available as the show is airing. A lot of our viewers like to chat with one another, say hi. Everybody's become friends, which is nice. And we can even see some of the comments as well as you're spreading them into the chat room there. And if you'd like to chat during the course of our show, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is where we house all of these episodes, hundreds of episodes of our series. And you can binge watch them all too, because we archive every episode of JMS for your viewing pleasure. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, which costs nothing, you can be a part of the JMS Levity Hall viewership that is commenting and saying hello to one another in our chat room that's exclusive to subscribers. Good to have you with us. Hope your day is going well. As I mentioned, we have an extraordinary guest who's given back to society in such an extraordinary way. She's a brilliant author. This is a wonderful venture that she has taken on, and we're so excited to share it with you here. I just want to first tell you, before we talk about the book, which is really incredible, Death in Wartime China, A Daughter's Discovery, I just want to tell you a little bit about Judy Goodman Ikels and her incredible career serving our country. She's the recipient of one meritorious award and 3 superior honor awards from the Department of State. She received the 2017 Champion of Career Enhancement Award from the Associates of the American Service Worldwide. Also, after 28 years of service, in 2019, she was honored with the Director General of the Foreign Service Cup awarded annually to one civil service employee for devotion to duty, outstanding leadership, creative innovation, and tireless pursuit of what is right. During her illustrious career, she managed a broad portfolio, developing policy and implementing programs in telework and flexible work arrangements, student loan repayment, employee benefit programs, workers' compensation, leave and travel policy, family medical leave, military leave, bike subsidy, child care liaison, community activities such as Take Your Child to Work Day. Recent work life team initiatives have included opening a child care center, implementing emergency backup care, establishing the department's first voluntary leave bank, expanding the lactation program, and piloting the first overseas wellness program as well. Judy has lived and worked in Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, Greece, Mexico, and Venezuela. And in addition, of course, to English, she speaks Spanish and Portuguese as well. Now, her devotion and love for her father led her to craft and share this truer than fiction tale of her father's military heroism in her new book, Death in Wartime China, A Daughter's Discovery. She grew up in Dallas, graduate of the University of Texas. The book is published by Wheatmark and available for purchase on Amazon. Uncovering an overlooked story of World War II bravery, discovered in greater detail by Judy in 2015 during a trip to China to see firsthand a memorial that was erected to honor her father and Chinese-American friendship. Through family archives and letters and all kinds of incredible research that she has done, which has been extraordinary. Judy uncovered a lot of rich information, and we're so excited to share it with you here on the Jim Masters Show series. You're going to really be, I think you're going to be empowered and inspired by this story. The family archives, the letters, the photos, and research all brought together in this elegant and vital book that gives Americans and history buffs at home and abroad a most inspiring and unforgettable story of unmitigated bravery. Here's a little synopsis for you, and then we'll bring Judy on and she'll dive in deep with us here. Back on June 10th, 1944, a B-24 Liberator bomber loses its engines following a raid on Japanese forces. The pilot, Second Lieutenant William H. Wallace Jr., sacrifices himself to save the lives of his 7 crew members. He leaves behind a wife and an unborn daughter, Judy. 71 years later, Judy receives an email from a stranger who is working on a memorial project for World War II soldiers who served in China. Beyond reading old newspaper accounts and quiet family conversations, Judy has never fully explored what happened to her birth father, but the stranger's questions kindle a deep desire to learn more. Death in Wartime China, Daughter's Discovery weaves together Bill Wallace's odyssey as an airman with his daughter's journey of reconnection. By turns moving and thought-provoking, Judy's story paints a picture of quiet heroism, friendship that spans oceans, and love that survives death. It's an extraordinary story, folks, and it is riveting. It is a love story. It is a discovery. And we're going to share it with you with our illustrious guests coming to us from the Washington, D.C. area here in the United States. So, gang, thanks for joining us. Sit back, relax. Don't forget to comment if you enjoy this episode. Give us a like on the YouTube channel, and also drop a comment in the comments section. Interact with us as well. We really appreciate when you do that. And let's welcome our very special guest right now, Judy Goodman Ikels, joining us from Washington, D.C. Judy, welcome to the show. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And before we talk about the book, thank you so much for your incredible service to our country in so many ways. You and your husband both, and obviously your dad, giving of yourself in such incredible ways that are long-lasting and impactful for all of us.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for inviting me to join you and your guests around the world. As you listed off the countries from which people might be listening, I thought to myself, I've lived in some of those places. My husband had a very interesting and impactful career in the Foreign Service. He was a journalist, a public affairs officer. And in that role, your job when you go overseas is to tell America's story and also to really get to know the people of the country. If you're a public affairs officer, you're not sitting in your office very much. You're out and about. So we made wonderful friends around the world, many of whom have heard about my story, my book recently, and have reached out to me. So I really appreciate that. I had the opportunity also as a family member to become very interested in the role of family members in the Foreign Service, and had the great opportunity to work on some policies that would help them. A lot of people think the Foreign Service is kind of a, I don't know, elegant but kind of stuffy career. We, on the other hand, think of ourselves as rugged adventurers and representatives of the U.S. government. So thank you for commenting on that.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. And, and through all of this, we're talking now about 70 plus years later, you come across this letter that sparks an extraordinary journey of discovery for your family history, discovery about your father, who also sacrificed for, our freedoms as well, but also discovery a little bit more about who Judy is. What an incredible thing to happen as you're going, about your life and doing all these wonderful things. And you think everything is all laid out, and then boom, open up a box or what have you, and there's this letter. Tell us about how that discovery was made and what that was like when you discovered that.
So obviously, I was a posthumous child, and I was born into a very loving family. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, and my paternal grandparents as well. But when you're a little child, you don't really understand anything about death. And I knew that my father had been killed in the war. This became pretty clear to me by the time I was 6 or 7. But by then, my mother had remarried, and my name had changed from Judy Wallace to Judy Goodman. And so I was never really addressed as Bill Wallace's daughter. So that's one thing. Time went on, and in my book, I say, as a young child, I didn't really understand the word taboo, but I very well understood what it meant. In that, when I tried to bring up questions and ask about Bill, I always got this sad response. And I didn't want to make people sad. Children know what they're supposed to do. My
Right.
job was to make people happy. And so I avoided a lot of questions that I really could have asked. I regret that I didn't ask my grandparents more.
Mm.
And so that part of my life was there. Everyone in the family, of course, knew about it, but it was not in the forefront. However, due to the wonderful world we live in, the online world that we all live in September of 2015, I got an email on LinkedIn. And this is what it said. It's very short. I'm just going to read it very quickly. Hi, Judy. I hope you'll forgive me for contacting you. I'm trying to get in touch with relatives of Ernestine Goodman, whose first husband, Second Lieutenant William Hubert Wallace, was killed in World War II. We are desperate to find some images or more information about him for a memorial project. Signed, Pat Lucas, country representative in China at the Asia Foundation. Okay.
Yeah.
This was a little bombshell. Number one, we nearly deleted it because, if you don't know somebody, and especially on LinkedIn, delete that. I didn't know who it was. My husband, however, was a little bit curious, and he opened this communication.
Wow.
He was the first one to see this, and he called to me in the kitchen, and he said, Judy, I think you better sit down. I have something here you need to read. And I read this email, and I couldn't believe it. I had never in 70 years had anyone ask me anything about my birth father. And here it comes from somebody in China. This was the most curious thing. I just couldn't believe it. But I wasted no time in writing him back and saying, Bill Wallace was my father. I never knew him. He died in China before I was born. I would love to learn more about your research and how you singled out Bill Wallace as a fallen soldier of interest.
Hmm.
So that was the beginning of this big adventure.
Yeah.
Jim?
Right. This is extraordinary. I mean, it had to be emotional at certain times for you as well, because like I said, you had your life is plotted out, you knew what you knew, and you're living and you're moving forward, and then all of a sudden this just shows how life can take so many twists and turns, and the unpredictability of it and the beauty of it as well. It had to be emotional to all of a sudden have this hit you in the way that did, because I'm sure over the years you always wondered, and there would be times on Father's Day and different things, holidays, where you were wondering and had certain bits of information, and now all of a sudden here's this, and it's your husband that sort of wants to dig a little deeper on your behalf to figure it out along with you on the journey. That had to be very touching and moving. And were you resistant at all? Were you trepidatious at all to learning more? Or were you gung-ho, wow, I've been waiting all these years for this? What was that like for you?
Well, it was very emotional. And I didn't know Pat Lucas. And you know, the way the world is these days, if you get some kind of communication, you have to establish for yourself whether or not it's legitimate. And so it took me a minute to figure out, well, was this person really interested in my father, or was there some other motive? Well, there wasn't another motive. This was the real deal. Pat Lucas, as it turns out, is a very empathetic, wonderful gentleman who had spent 20 years in China. And he was very interested in the American servicemen who were working there during World War II, defending the Chinese against the Japanese. It's the China, Burma, India theater of World War II. And honestly, I think a lot of people either don't know about it or have kind of forgotten about the alliance that we had with China. And because Pat was right there, he had, I would call it a research hobby, to find the names of Americans who served there. And he ran across the heroism of my father. And he had been trying for some 10 years, he told me, to find any relative of Bill Wallace's in Texas. He had written to veterans groups and high schools, and he could never find anybody. And he felt sad about this. It turns out that, you know, Pat Lucas turned into a very good friend. He is an honest broker. So, and he just felt that anyone who had been as heroic as my father had been deserved to be remembered. He spent years, actually, trying to locate the exact spot where my father's body was found when he parachuted from the B-24. We can talk about that last flight if you want to. But Pat, so the first thing he did, which let me know that it was the real deal, was that he got on an airplane in Beijing and he flew to Bethesda, Maryland. That's the first thing he did.
Wow.
And that showed me that he was really serious about talking to Bill's daughter. Now, he showed up at our house. We had a nice little visit, and then he turned on his video camera to ask me some questions. And you talk about emotion, Jim, I couldn't get through that.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't stop crying. Every time he asked me a question, I was just, you know, finally I was embarrassed. I said, this is ridiculous. I don't know. But it was all of that pent up history and emotion that I had never been able myself to grieve for the loss of my father. I had never been able to do that. And Pat Lucas helped me with that.
Had there been opportunities to discuss it with your mother or grandparents, any siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles through the years?
There had been some, but like I say, my mother remarried.
Right.
Her husband adopted me. I had a father, and I grew up with a father, Judy Goodman, who was really a wonderful, amazing, also a veteran, a Navy veteran. He kept his Navy uniform till the day he died. He served in the South Pacific. I knew a lot about his experience. But again, you know, my mother would say when I asked her, well, what was it like when you and Bill were married? And she told me about traveling around with him. She went to all of his training when he traveled to different bases in the United States. They were only married 3.5 years. And she said, and of course, the whole time was occupied with the war. They were married on August the 1st, 1941. And December the 7th, 1941 was Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
So they had, their whole married life was occupied with the news of the war, his training and preparing to go to the war, and then him not coming home. So she said to me one time, it all went by like a sweet dream. And that's about what she told me.
Amazing. Yeah. to learn all of this too in the way that you have. What are some other things that you learned along the way, and how interesting it is that you decided to also go into service, servicing others, helping others, uh, as your father did?
It's interesting, Jim. I don't know how you ever really get to know your parents, but when one of them is lost, you reflect on it in a different way. Because Bill Wallace hesitated not one moment to enlist, and he knew he wanted to be a pilot. He was heading for that from the get-go. He knew that.
Yeah.
And I came into public service. I was going to be a school teacher. I was planning to graduate from the University of Texas and move back to Dallas and teach school until I met Larry Ikels. And we had a whirlwind romance, let me tell you. We met in September.
That could be another book.
She asked me to marry him, and he said, and by the way, I'm going overseas. I know I'm going overseas. And I knew I wanted to do that with him. We married again in August. I guess everybody in our families, August is the big month.
Yeah.
And within a week, we were in Washington, D.C. And after that, it was, 31 years overseas and back in Washington. It's just the most satisfying kind of career to have. If you can do something that you really enjoy, but also help somebody else, that's the best. That right there is the best you can get.
And like you say, you traveled the world. You lived in all these different countries. You also speak Portuguese and Spanish. And living in these other countries and learning about other cultures and appreciating other cultures as well, and how, we're all in this together. What are some of the things that you learned along the way, even about yourself, in living in these other countries?
Jim, it's this could be another book, and there is quite a literature on cross-cultural understanding. I was lucky that before I went overseas with the Foreign Service, I actually had some training. The Foreign Service Institute offered programs for spouses, most of whom at the time were women. Let me just say this one. Here's a historical point for you. Up until 1972, a woman could be a Foreign Service officer, but if she married, she had to resign her commission. So all Foreign Service officers were either men or unmarried women, and all the spouses were women. I'm happy to say all of that has changed.
That has changed.
All of that has changed. But back in the day, that's what we had. And so I knew how important language studies were. I already knew Spanish. I had grown up in Texas, and I had a very good background in Spanish from schooling there, not necessarily I knew from schooling. But I loved learning Portuguese. Eu falo português. I love speaking Portuguese. And I learned enough Greek to be dangerous. But anyway, what I learned is that no matter where you live, where you're posted, and this was also true in China, once you get behind the geographic barriers, once you get behind the political barriers, you're always lurking about. And if you can overcome some of that language barrier, you will find people who are very much like you. This was true when I went to China, and I couldn't speak Chinese. It was very frustrating to me. But I met people who, they just want to raise their children. They want them to get a good education. They want to take care of their parents. They want to have friends, and they want to live a peaceful life. And that's what I found when I went to that little mountain village to see that memorial. And that's what I found everywhere we lived.
Wow. That's incredible, huh? That's extraordinary. There's a lot packed in what you just said that I think people could really pay heed to in the crazy times we're living in now, where everything is division and being pulled apart, and I'm there and you're there and we're not together, and I don't know who you are and I don't understand you. And there's just so much. We're going in that direction. We're spinning into a direction that the earth would prefer we're not. The earth is always smoother, operating on its axis more smoothly when we're together, when things are balanced and there's a unification. That could be a whole other book. I got a lot of books in mind for you here. It's going to be a mini series on ABC with Judy. And so as you're discovering this, what was the pursuit of getting the information, learning more about your father, his service? That must have been quite intensive and exhaustive, but in a beautiful way as well. Huh? What was that process like?
Pat Lucas kicked everything off for me. By the time we had met, he had already put a lot of information on his website, which I will plug at this point, which is called Remembering Shared Honor, rshonor.net. And this is where he has this collection of stories about American servicemen in China. Pat had already made a Freedom of Information request to get the actual military report of my father's last flight.
Mm.
That is a very precious document to me.
Gee, yeah.
And then I had this box of material that my mother left for me. Now, keep in mind, I've said we moved overseas 6 times. I can't tell you how many times my household went in and out of storage. I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to find that box, but I did. Mother kept the letters that she exchanged with Bill. He wrote her a ton of poetry. This is something else that my father and I have in common. I write poetry. Mm. And his was very beautiful. So found the poetry. His had a few photographs, his Purple Heart, his wings, like that. So I had, his birth certificate, the family historical documents. And I got them all together and I started thinking about how I might be able to organize. And so the trip to China really helped me, obviously, realize that I needed to write about this. I had thought about writing about him before, but I didn't have the impetus, and frankly, I didn't have all the information that I needed. I have since discovered that his story of heroism was actually documented in a couple of published history books available at the library and other places. So I was behind the curve a little bit. I was.
But still, I mean, you didn't give in or give up, right? You must have been turning a lot of pages yourself as you were gathering the information. We don't want to give the whole book away, but what are a few nuggets, some things that you learned that maybe surprised you as well?
Well, let's see. I know one thing. Well, there's, I could go on, but surprises. The last place that Bill trained in the United States was very close to where I'm living now. I had no idea. His last posting in the United States before he went overseas was at Langley Air Force Base. And he was training on a B-24 bomber. And they had a new piece of equipment called radar. And they would bring the planes up, the pilots, the young pilots. My dad was 25 when he died. I mean, all these guys are so young. And they put faux bombing targets, decoy bombing targets on the Potomac River.
Wow.
Which I go by every day to get to Virginia. I mean, it's just right there. It's such a prominent landmark. And the guys would fly up from Langley Field and they'd black out the windows and they'd do practice bombing on the river. I thought that was really close to home.
Yeah.
I learned more about the cost of the war. When you're reading about World War II, you can really get overwhelmed with statistics. But here's one that just floored me. And it floored me so much, I checked it over and over again before I published it. I wanted to be sure I was right. There were over 15,000 U.S. airmen who died in the United States on training flights during the course of World War II before they ever left the United States. Is that stunning?
That's a big number.
It's a huge number. I actually, I had the opportunity to do a talk about my book in conjunction with Dr. Timothy Keck, who is a recent retired historian of the Air Force. And I had him check that.
Yeah.
I mean, and so many people died in so many different places. World War II is just, the numbers are just staggering. That was one that really surprised me.
That's extraordinary, huh? On so many different levels.
Yeah.
That's the numbers.
The cost.
Yeah.
The cost of war.
Now, do you refer to, because you obviously, like you mentioned, with the adoption, have your father, do you refer to Bill going forward as Bill? Do you ever say my dad, my other dad, my birth dad, my father? How do you reconcile that?
Well, it depends on the conversation. I call him my birth father, but throughout the book, I refer to him as Bill. He was named after his grandfather, who I knew very well. And his father and his mother I knew very well. They were part of my life.
Have there been interactions with other members of his family as a result of this information that you discovered?
Jim, I'm hoping that some of them will hear this broadcast. I have had a darn frustrating time trying to find
people.
Yeah, it has been frustrating. Bill was an only child. I am an only child. Those, there weren't very many of us to begin with. So I would love to hear from Wallace family members. It's a project I have. Another one.
It has to be amazing, and only you would know it, the feeling in realizing that, talking about the chain of events that occurred that caused him at a young age, as he was serving, to lose his life. The bomber loses its engines following the raid, and your dad sacrifices himself to save the lives of 7 of his crew members, leaving behind your mother and unborn daughter, Judy. Knowing that he did that, there's a certain character there. There's just a certain way of thinking, of being, that not everybody would necessarily do that. Sometimes, the captain of the ship or what have you jumps first, and then everybody scrambles to find out what they're doing. In this case, your father, or Bill, he decided to do what he could to save those around him, his support team. That must hit you in a certain spot, knowing that he was a beautiful person in that way.
Yeah, he was I think, a very sweet person. He wrote beautiful letters, not only to my mother, but to his mother and family. And one of the things that I learned, which was very satisfying to me, through reading these letters, you see, I learned that Mother and Bill were trying to have a child. Because, it's very plain when you read the letters. Have you heard anything? Are you sure yet? And by reconstructing and looking at the dates on the the postmarks that had gone back and forth. He had just received word that she was pregnant, and she had just received a letter that confirmed that he knew that. And in fact, in one of his letters, he said, I haven't told the boys over here yet, meaning I haven't told them yet that I'm an expectant father. He said in the letter, he said, you know how expectant fathers can be sometimes addle-headed. And I don't want anyone questioning my motives in a crisis. That's a quote. So, I mean, that's just so meaningful to me because he knew. Look, I think about it today, you know, and I know every generation is different, but now to have children, you have to have your house, you have to have a car, you have to finish your college education, you have to have a good job.
Good credit score.
Good credit score. And here they were, these two young people, married not quite 3 years, with nothing, in the middle of World War II. And he wanted, and she did too, wanted a child. I mean, this just says so much to me about their generation. And of course, lucky for me.
Did you, in doing your research, and you're still digging, still learning, even beyond the book, are there elements of him that you or possibly others recognize in yourself?
I'd like to think so. He was buying gifts for mother and his mother and his mother-in-law. when they stopped in Brazil to get to this theater of war, they left from Langley Field, stopped in the Caribbean, stopped in Brazil, over to Africa, and up through India. And he bought gifts in Brazil and in India to send home to mother and the other women in the family. I think he's very generous. Mm. I would like to be generous like that. I try to be. And he loved music. I had known that he sang in the school chorus, as I did. Mm. And he loved, he writes one night about listening to Frank Sinatra on the radio. I grew up listening to Frank Sinatra because my parents loved it.
Right.
And beyond that, I married a fella who was just, every time I got in the car, he had Frank Sinatra on Sirius radio. So
how uncanny is that, huh?
So there are these little threads. And then, yeah. We all grew up in Texas. I went to the same high school that Bill attended, and my mother and my adopted father, my aunt and uncle, we had all gone to the same high school. So, I mean, there's quite a bit in common there. I knew a lot of the friends that he had during school, even though he didn't have siblings.
That's really extraordinary, huh? Yeah. When you decided to write the book and share the story, what was that process like? Was there a point in the beginning where you said, this is kind of personal, maybe I should keep this as just within the family and just for us? And then maybe something triggered that said, you know what, this might inspire others to tell their stories, to dig a little deeper, to maybe figure out some of the connections within their family bloodline and the historical nature of the family and traditions and all of that. What was that like? Were you gung-ho about writing the book right away, or did you need some time to be convinced or convince yourself to share this in such a public way? And we're glad you did, actually.
Well, Jim, that's a very good question. I think it was a process of evolution for me as well. When we first learned about Pat Lucas and the fact that he and these villagers, these Chinese villagers, and Pat's American exchange students had put up a monument in Kunming, when I first learned that, my daughter had the idea that we should all go as a family to visit Bill's grave at Arlington Cemetery, which again is very close to us. We had all been there at one time or another. I had been there many times, but we had never been there all together. And we did that in the fall of 2015. We took a photographer with us, and that turned into a little hardbound photo album that required me to write some things that I wanted to include in that, and that was going to be for the family. But when I looked at it, and then after we went to China, and I had all of this other information, then I knew I wanted to write something for the family. And I put together an outline, and I did a lot of research. I have a friend here in Washington who's, I call him a historian. He calls himself an amateur historian, but honestly, I don't know the difference. He helped me find books, research books. And I started building this little library. And as I started doing that, I realized that I had a lot more to say.
Yeah.
There was a lot more to the story. And I'm also an advocate for people telling their stories. I'm involved with the Foreign Service Institute has a wonderful oral history program to which I have contributed myself. And I just think it's so important to record, because so much of history is not really in history books. It's the letters, it's the thoughts, it's the emotions, it's the family stories that make up add so much to what you learn.
Right, exactly.
And I couldn't keep it to myself. And I did think, mind you, I had my children and grandchildren read this.
Oh, that's terrific.
Before I went public. And I said, I want you to read this with the thought. If there's anything here that you don't want me to say, that you think is too personal, flag it for me. So I got their clearance.
That's great to have shared it with them. And what's their response been? I imagine, because this connects a few dots for them too, and will be very helpful as they continue their life's journey. Maybe they're figuring out some of their ancestral history and their family history as well. You've sort of set a nice stage in a way for them through the publishing of this book.
I hope so. Well, my husband was very instrumental in getting us to China. That was the longest trip that we had ever made since he had left the Foreign Service. And he was encouraging me all along to take notes and think hard about things.
Yeah.
And then I have two wonderful children. Coincidentally, our son David shares a birthday with Bill Wallace. They both were born August the 23rd. And my daughter has always been very kind and generous with her time and helping me think things through. Both of them. And I have two wonderful grandsons and a son-in-law, all of whom have been very supportive. So I am hopeful that this will set an idea that they too can record family history. They don't have to clear it with me, by the way. Just write it. I do have some more family stories that I want to record, and I'm kind of working on that right now.
When you the writing process sometimes can be a really interesting thing, especially when it's a book, and that's a monumental task, and it takes a long time. How long did this take from the idea to then the first few words on paper to completion? What was the span of that process like, Judy?
So I met with an editor first. And in order to have that meeting, we had lunch together. I started putting some things down. I got my outline ready. I did a statement of purpose. I kind of approached it as really as a project. And shortly after Christmas, well, let's see, that would have been 2017. No, 2018. I finished breakfast one morning and I looked at the living room, and it still had a lot of trappings from Christmas in there, ribbons and wrapping paper, and I don't know. I usually I like to get that stuff cleaned up really fast, but for some reason, I walked straight through that mess to my desk and I started writing.
Mm.
And I had a full manuscript in about 6 or 7 months.
Wow.
I worked almost every day.
Yeah.
I loved it. When I was writing, I tell you, I didn't want to be doing anything else, and I didn't. Here's the point. You can clean house forever.
Yeah.
There's no end to it. And there's no end to laundry. It's just, it's ubiquitous. But I had it in my mind that I wanted to write this. And the more I wrote, the more I wanted to write. And it just kind of fell out of my head. I don't know. If that's a typical story. It wasn't hard. What I want to say is, once I got started, I had done all this reading. I had cataloged all of my information so I could find it really quickly. I just took off like a train.
Yeah, you were. So a lot of times I'll ask a question in this form of, and it doesn't sound like the beginning was really difficult. You took off like a train and it was just flowing through you. You were this conduit of this energy and it was flowing out of you and it was coming out on paper. So when you look at the total process of writing the book, would you say it was harder to get it going, harder to know when to end it, harder to know when to put the last period on the last sentence, be comfortable with, that's it, that's what we're sharing, we're good, maybe a couple of rewrites, but we're good, and then off to the publisher. Like for me, I've done family tribute videos for folks who have passed, and the inertia to do it is extraordinary. I must do it. I've done eulogies. It's not something I can even debate. I just feel I have to tell their story. I have to bring us all together. We have to celebrate the person's life. So I've done these elaborate video tributes as well to those who have passed. And for me, the hardest part is not getting it going. Oh, I'm raring to go and I'll be up 24/7 for 2 weeks if I have to, because I'm in and we're pulling 8mm film and video and photos, and really it's the end, knowing that that's it. There's no more, there are no more photos. There's no more story to tell because that person is gone. So I find it difficult sometimes I'm not a good goodbye person anyway, but to end it because I know it's the wrap up. For you, was it hard to put an ending on it and know when you were comfortable with it, with the last period on the last sentence?
It didn't seem hard because I had, early in my writing process, I put two things together in my mind that I wanted to use for the ending. I didn't have, this is a little bit intuitive. It wasn't hard to get started either. What got me bogged down a little bit was in the middle, because
You're the second person that told me that. They said that was bridging the beginning with the end and linking those two together. Is that similar for you?
Yeah. I struggled a little bit with how much to tell, for example, about growing up in Dallas and about Bill growing up in Dallas, how much of that would actually be interesting to people. I didn't have a gauge of that, except I knew that it was important for the story. And everything that we did in China, I tried to choose events there that would be emblematic, if you will, of a larger, topic. I had, for example, I had read about, of course, when the war started in China, they had no airstrips, no airports, never mind
Nothing,
it's a place to land an airplane. So when the British and the Americans came in, the way they did that was the Chinese would give up their prime rice fields, flat surfaces, the only flat surfaces down. It's a very mountainous in the Kunming area.
It's extraordinary, yeah.
So they'd give that up, and then legions of Chinese men, women, and children would haul rocks onto these flat and crush it on the spot with brute force to turn it into gravel to enable the planes to land and take off. I had read about this. Pat Lucas made it possible for me to visit the airstrip that my father was trying to reach the night he ran out of gas. And on top of that, he found two Chinese gentlemen who, as teenagers, had helped crush those rocks. So, to me, I mean,
amazing.
It was totally amazing. So that illuminates the story. That helped me to tell that part of the war about the conditions there. It helped me describe an experience that I had. And it showed the dedication of the Chinese, which is something I was very much interested in doing. So, but then, how many of those stories can you tell? Or are they too disjointed or something like that? That's what I struggled with. The opening of the book, I knew I wanted to start with his death, because that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the story. And it wasn't until, when I got my hands on the Freedom of Information record of the last flight, I just used that for the opening. Also, my editor he's very helpful. And one day he had been here, we'd been talking about, just general stuff. And Roger, just as he was getting ready to leave the house, he actually had one foot out the front door. And he turned around and looked at me and he said, "Judy, what you need to do is you need to get in that airplane and fly that last flight with your father." He said, "You just need to get in that airplane."
Powerful stuff.
So that changed the opening of the book. Right there. That I knew I wanted to start with that. But that helped me. And if you looked at the book, I actually did get on B-24.
You did, huh?
I did.
What was
the whole family?
What was that like?
Oh, Jim, I'll never forget it. I was in an airplane like my father had flown. I looked at the cockpit. I stood on the narrow little walkway. The B-24, one of its flaws, if you can say that, is that to get from the front to the back of the airplane, there was just a 9-inch wide strip of lumber that you had to walk on. the bomb bay doors, when they're open, come up into the side of the airplane like a roll-top desk. And we visited this airplane when it was on a little airport up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, on a very rainy Saturday in the end of summer. And, you know, it reminded me of the monsoon rains that they had in China. I will never forget being on that airplane. It was really that I tell
Cathartic, I'm sure. Yeah.
other people who are trying to write, if there's something that you're writing about, if you can get to it, if you can go see it in person, your writing will be so much better.
Yes.
Even if you can't, I mean, like if you're trying to write about a family home and you haven't been there, go look for it, or look for a house that's like it and get into it, or whatever it is. See if you can personally get yourself there, because your writing will be so much enriched by doing that.
That's incredible. It really is, on so many levels. How did you come up with the design of the cover of the book, Judy?
I worked with a wonderful woman named Lori Conster at Wheatmark. And what I told her is that I wanted it to look kind of wartime. I wanted a picture of a B-24. Now, I have to tell you, it's funny. The first mock-up that they sent me had a beautiful airplane on it, but it wasn't a B-24. Which, of course, now I can spot a B-24 in a lineup a million miles away now. It has these two oval stabilizer fins on the back. Well, anyway, so there's the B-24. And then I told her I wanted a red ribbon on it someplace, because I had the idea, and I did, that when I gave this book as a gift, I would always give a red ribbon, a Chinese red ribbon bookmark with it. So then we decided on these three photographs here at the bottom: a picture of Bill in his dress flight uniform, a picture of me and my mom at my first Christmas, and then a picture of me visiting the memorial. And she figured out how to do it. I don't know how she did, but do you like it?
I think it's fantastic. Yeah. I think it tells the story, or at least invites you to want to know more in looking at it. It's sort of riveting. It gives you an idea of a little bit of what you can expect, but doesn't give it all away. And I love the shot of the bomber there with the clouds and sort of that effect. Like, what is he flying into? Almost like it's the last flight, that kind of thing. And to have the trifecta of the memorial, your dad, your mom there in that way is, thank God this happened, right? Thank God you and your husband found the letter. Not to say that your kids or grandkids weren't to find it later on, but that you did, the daughter.
Yeah.
There's something very special that is hard to even put in words, in the fact that in your lifetime, you were able to come across this situation that sort of didn't necessarily always put periods in all the sentences, but filled in some puzzle pieces for you that needed to be filled in a great way, and to be able to give you the the impetus to then share it with the world in the way that you're doing through this book. How glorious is that in your lifetime, this discovery of who and what actually happened, huh?
It's been such a journey. And you know something, Jim, it's not over.
Not at all. It's just the beginning.
Can I tell you about my calligrapher? Do you have time for me to tell you about
Sure, absolutely.
So I knew I wanted a calligraphy for this book, because the monument in China, of course, is partially in English and partially in Chinese. And so in my book, I have this calligraphy, and it says, "Father, hero, never forgotten." Now, this is not the first calligraphy I found. I had one, and then I showed it to a Chinese friend, and she said, "Well, Judy, I think you can do a little better than the one you have." And I said, "Well, how can I do that?" And she said, "Well, I'll introduce you to someone." And my friend Marilyn introduced me to Professor John S.C. Wang, who I learned has been the chief calligrapher, historian for the Smithsonian Museum for 40 years. And he lives in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And when I was introduced to him, he invited me to his studio. And I told him, kind of the idea that I had. And he drew this. He drew this for me.
Wow.
And then when that's another experience that I will never forget, being in that studio surrounded with all of his tools and beautiful calligraphies on the wall that his father had done. He started learning calligraphy when he was 8 years old in Taiwan. The smell of the ink, the tea that he served me. And when he finished, I said, "Dr. Wang, what do I owe you for this calligraphy? It's so beautiful." And he said, "Judy, you don't owe me anything. I'm doing this to honor your father." He said, "Just bring me a copy of the book." So naturally, the book was published on May the 6th. And the next week, the first copy that I got with me in my hands, I slept with. I couldn't put it down. The second copy I got, I took to Dr. Wang.
Mm.
And so it's and he opened up to me and introduced me to this wonderful Chinese American community here in our neighborhood in Washington. That community has been extremely supportive and extremely welcoming of this book. I was invited to the Chinese Writers Association, to a group called Tea for Soul, where they review books and other things. The Chinese American community has been overwhelmingly loving about this book. So sweet.
Mm. It just lets you know that there are good people everywhere. And the timing of the book, I think, is not ironic, but important and timely, topical, and gives you maybe a different perspective on just how we are as people around the world and how we need each other. And like I was saying to you before we went, live on air, the earth spins a lot smoother on its axis when we're all together and helping one another and telling each other's stories and celebrating each other's stories and our victories and helping each other through tragedy. And that's the way this whole thing, humanity was designed. And not to sound Pollyanna, but I think we've been pulling away from a lot of that, and everything is me and me and me and me. They said the 1980s was me. I don't know. It's quite me now. I think it's more me now. And so I think that it's just amazing how the timing of this book is now. And I think there's a lot of incredibleness that people will get when they read it. And it may even, again, inspire them to take another look at their family history, their story, whatever their story is, and they may be inspired to write about their story as well. What are a couple of the takeaways that you hope the reader is left with upon reading this book, Judy?
Well, there are a couple of things. At a very basic level, I think it's important for us to remember that China and the United States were allied during World War II. I know things change. I know politics change, but and also just to realize that there were a lot of people who sacrificed to defend China during the war. A lot of Americans died there, including my father. I want people to remember that, or to focus on the fact that you can still learn a lot about someone who's gone if you are lucky enough to be able to read their letters and read history about them. You can really construct quite solid memories if that's something you want to do, which is something I very much wanted to do with my father. And I also want to just comment on the power of storytelling. I don't know whether it's because I'm from Texas and I come from a long line of storytellers, but we value the ability to tell a story that has, a beginning, a middle, and an end, that holds a little suspense, that talks about love and talks about faith and about the things that are really important in life. Those stories are really valuable, and I encourage people to do oral histories. So much of what is wonderful in the world is not necessarily published in a book. It could be a conversation with a friend. It could be, and those things are worth holding on to, and they're worth documenting in some way, even if you don't write them down. I mean, there are all universities have oral history projects, and there's StoryCorps, and there are all kinds of ways, or start one yourself. It doesn't take that much to get some stories on tape. So I encourage people to think about that. Yeah.
It's incredible. Are you already writing the next book? Are you already digging in? You are, yeah.
Actually, what I'm doing, or I'm hoping to be doing soon, I didn't realize how busy I was going to be marketing it. This is quite taking me by surprise, but it's fun. I enjoy it. But I do want to write my husband's oral history, because he never did that. And he was quite a remarkable gentleman. And I was very lucky to be married to him. And I do want to get some of his history and biography and some of his stories recorded for his children.
Well, that's beautiful. We'll look forward to that as well, Judy. This was an extraordinary conversation, and it was wonderful learning a little bit more about your story and Bill as well, and your birth father, and the sacrifices made. Also, the book and what it took to write the book, and the emotion and the intense research that was involved, the takeaways, and also a little bit about you and your background, and serving, our country and our community and our society with the positive things that you have been working on through the many, many years that are still in effect today, legacy building work that has helped society advance in very positive ways. So this was really something special, and I really appreciate your stopping by the Jim Masters Show series, and I hope you'll come back. We'll leave the porch light on for you, as we always say, and I hope the show met whatever expectations you had, and you enjoyed the time with me as much as I absolutely have with you, Judy.
Jim, I just want to finish by saying that I know that one of your special words is levity. And I have felt levity in this interview, and I hope that if people have the opportunity to read the book, that they will also find a good dose of levity there. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. That's what you said when we were chatting before we went live on the air, that this is a story of levity in many, many deep ways. There's the book, everybody, Death in Wartime China, A Daughter's Discovery, by our very special guest, Judy Goodman Ikels. And she shared it with us here in great detail. And Judy, again, we thank you very much for spending time with us. Continued success on your journey, let's definitely stay in touch, and we welcome you back to our series anytime, and spread the word about our show. We would love that.
Thank you.
You be well, and you take care. And again, thanks for everything you've done for the good of all of us.